Welcome. This is episode 10 of Inner Whispers Radio. My name is Alan. I'm your host. The format, as always, is that we first talk to April, who's a full-body open deep trance channel, a best-selling author. And then after she speaks for a bit, Veronica will come in. April will bring Veronica in, and it'll be pretty quick. And then Veronica will respond to a variety of topics that I mentioned, and then deliver, her general message at the end. And then after that, after all the interesting stuff's done, I might make a few comments. So hold on. Here's April.
Hi, everyone. It's April. This is like my time to talk. And we get a lot of people who write in talking about their journey in the channeling process. And a lot of them talk about how they maybe have family or friends who just don't get it or might be deeply religious in some sort and therefore feel like that their channeling endeavors are, not the most positive thing. And I'd like to share some stuff that I went through when I first started doing all this. I was a Catholic girl. I went to Catholic school, Catholic all-girl boarding school, and my mother was very Catholic. My father wasn't really anything. He wasn't religious. He wasn't not religious. He just sort of moved along. But my mom was pretty adamant about heaven, hell, the pearly gates, and all that. And so that was deeply ingrained in me throughout my life. So when I first started, in this channeling endeavor, I was within a group that was very cohesive and very supportive, but I kept it all real close to my vest. So I didn't talk about it with people. When somebody asked me what I was up to, I would say, not much, and not tell them anything. Because at the time, I was about 32, and I was just discovering all this, and I just didn't really want anyone to know about it, especially my Catholic mother. So I never talked about it. And as I've told you all before, I grew up a dancer. My mom and I opened a dance studio when I was 16, and my mother continued to run it. It was her livelihood. It was her participation in the world, and she did a really great job of it. But she was very conservative, very religious, and was always asking me if I went to Mass on Sunday. And, of course, I wasn't. And I was deeply involved in a channeling group and becoming a channel myself or rediscovering the channeling in me. So I never talked about it with my mom. In fact, I avoided it altogether. And because she was in Michigan and I was in California, it was a pretty easy thing to do. And my mother was not computer savvy on any level, or so I thought. She didn't have a computer. She wouldn't even know how to turn one on. That's how I thought it was. So the dance studio did a recital every year, of course, and then every Christmas there was a Nutcracker ballet, which started big, heavy-duty rehearsals like in September. So my mom was tied up with that 7 days a week, which was great because it kept her busy. She was in her late 70s at the time, actually early 70s. And it kept her active. I mean, she helped run the rehearsals. She was sort of like the person in charge. And I would come in to help facilitate the production of the Nutcracker every year, which was a Herculean effort because it was a lot of work. She would call me on the weekends when she was deep in Nutcracker rehearsals, and we would talk, and she would tell me how all the kids were. And I had a niece at the time who was involved, so I wanted to hear all the stories about that. And my mom would ask me, what are you up to? And I said, well, I'm dancing, I'm teaching, I'm, doing stuff. But I never, ever told her, said, hey, Mom, I'm channeling. I never said anything like that because I didn't think she would understand. So there was one time when I called home, and everybody knows what the tone a mother has with you when she's caught you red-handed doing something. And this day that I called up, I said, hey, Mom, how's it going? And the first words out of her mouth were, what do you know about Omni Magazine? Now, a little backstory on that. Omni Magazine was sort of like a scientific kind of thing. When in the early days, I was doing a lot of automatic writing and writing of my own. And a poem that I had written was published. an Omni magazine. Now, Omni magazine is not a magazine my mother would pick up. Not something that she would look at, nor was she computer savvy, so it never even dawned on me that she would find out about it. But she did. Apparently, a young lady who was part of another dance studio who was just coming in to do the Nutcracker with our dance studio comes up to my mother, opens up the Omni magazine, and shows her this little article with the poem that says, April Clausen, on the bottom of it. And Clausen was my maiden name. And at that time, I was still using the maiden name quite a bit. And, of course, my mother immediately, gets on the phone and acts like mom and says, what do you know about Omni magazine? And I immediately reverted to my 12-year-old self going, Mom's caught me red-handed. What do I do? I felt like I was 12 again through the whole thing. And I said, well, yeah, I wrote that, yeah. She says, well, why didn't you tell me? I don't know, Mom. I just didn't get around to it, I guess, which I knew, of course, she wasn't buying. But it was one of those moments where I was caught, because it was a very spiritual kind of poem, kind of esoteric, paranormal stuff. And just the fact that she even read it, sent me over the cliff. I was like, oh, my God, no. And then I thought that for sure the next step was going to be she was going to ask me, are you a trance channel? But, of course, she didn't at the time. And it was hysterical to Alan, and maybe later on hysterical to me after I got over the shock of the whole thing, that she would have found out about this. How did this happen? And my mom passed away in 2009, and I always thought she never knew. I always thought that I'd gotten away with it and that, I wouldn't have to explain myself to her because I always turned into a 12-year-old kid, especially when she talked to me the way she did about the Omni magazine thing. So when she passed away, of course, after the funeral, after everything was said and done, my two siblings and myself, we had to clear out her stuff because we all lived in different parts of the world. And this was like 3 or 4 days to do this. So we started going through her things. And my brother, from across the room, picks up a thing and says, Spiritual Astronauts by April Crawford. He read it out loud. Now, of course, I'm on the other side of the room going through things. And, of course, my eyes bug out of my head about 3 feet. And I turn around, and I feel like I levitated over to him and gravitated and grabbed the papers from him. My mother had computer printouts of all the spiritual astronaut stuff that I ever wrote. Now, she didn't have a computer. She didn't know how to turn on a computer. Someone had to give it to her, and she had it. So it just completely, I just imploded internally that she would have had this stuff. So all this time that I thought I was so successfully hiding all this stuff from my mother, of course, she knew everything. And it was quite an eye-opener for me after she had passed to know that she knew. Even to this day, I tear up about it because maybe I could have talked to her about it. My mom was much more open and much more worldly than I gave her credit for. So all of you out there who are struggling to be channels, all of you who are worried, the family members or maybe a peer group would be judgmental of you, maybe they're not. Maybe they're saving all the stuff you talk about. Maybe they've got it all tucked away in a drawer somewhere. Just to have it, just to know a piece of you that you're not sharing. So I wanted to share today, that little tidbit. It was actually a couple tidbits about my mom and my journey with the deep trance channeling. I wasn't always, this open. God forbid, a radio show? Are you kidding me? But now I can talk about it freely. I've come into my own, and I've grown a lot. So if you're struggling to grow, hang in there. Because all the people you think you're hiding it from, you're probably not anyway. And inside, we think will make you feel really good to know that they did know and love you anyway.
Thank you, April. And now, while we wait for Veronica to come on in, which shouldn't be too long, she knows this is a thing we're doing. Are we here, Veronica? Okay, Veronica's here. Hey, Veronica, a couple of questions and some general topics that we should talk about for this particular show. And one is from someone who signs GG, which I recognize to be Geek Granny. And she has an interesting take on reincarnation and choosing your parents. And we've gone over the fact that if you want to, you can choose all of the circumstances of your physical life before you enter, including your parents, down to the color of your eyes, how much money they make, what country they live in, all of that stuff you can choose if you want to. A lot of people may not be knowledgeable enough to know they can do that. And then there's other people who are just explorers. For instance, some people go on vacations and they book every detail down to the, when the tour bus is going to leave, what hotels, check in, check out, everything. Other people just go there and say, let's see what happens. Just give me a rental car and I'll drive around wherever that is. In my case, I did that with Australia with a friend of mine. We had no reservations whatsoever, none. And we just showed up and explored. But I know other people really like to have details. And even now, today, if I'm going to go someplace, I make sure I at least have a hotel reservation. But, to each his own. So my question is, after all that, Geek Granny had a kind of a nuanced corollary to that thing about choosing your parents. Apparently, she's adopted, and she wanted to know that do some people not only choose the parents, but knowing that that's not going to work out for whatever reason, they also choose their adoptive parents. So how's that for a nuance? Hold on.
In this instance, there are always pathways to get to where you need to be. And perhaps the adopted parents, that was perhaps the individual's first choice, might not have been able to have children or already had agreements with others where they couldn't physically bring in the energy that it was looking for them. So a lot of times, the double level of experience comes into play. The idea that you come in and you choose a parent doesn't necessarily mean you're going to stay with that parent the whole time. A lot of times it's an avenue to get to the two individuals that you wanted to be with in the first place, but for whatever reason there was a prohibitive moment that didn't allow for it. So everyone's journey is a bit different, and there's no judgment on the journey. And we think in this instance that you find the vehicle, knowing that the vehicle will lead you to the ones you want to get to anyway.
Thank you, Veronica. I now have a question about twins. I've known a number of twins, and we get a lot of questions from twins. And in my experience, to say they're mostly male twins that I have experience with, is that one is dominant and one is recessive. One is very physical and one is intellectual, almost to the point of being amazing when you see the two of them together. One will be like going out and, quarterback of the football team. The other one will wear dark, black glasses and be in the band and in the chess club. So from my point of view, it does express the individuality of each soul, because logically they are absolutely identical. If they were machines, they would be identical. There would be no difference. And yet, if you look at twins, very often they're very, very different in their own personality. So how does that happen?
The twin process is very abundant in experience. That would be the best way to put it, we think. Sometimes a soul will split itself and incarnate in two separate forms to have two separate experiences at the same time. There is also the moment where there are two souls that are very much alike, want to have a kind of a like experience physically, but be able to express themselves soulfully while being a twin. And the same can be said for triplets, quadruplets, etc. So we'd say it is a unique experience because technically, if you're all just biological beings and you have two that look exactly alike, come from the same parents, sometimes the same split egg, then it should be an absolute same experience, that both should be rather completely alike in everything they think and do. And we know that many of you probably know twins that say, look, they look exactly alike. The biology is like, I can't even tell them apart half the time. But they are so different. All they have to do is open their mouth and talk, and I know immediately who it is because they're so different. So the twinning, triplet, quadruple kind of experience is a very unique one. But it shows clearly that it isn't the biology that has identity. It is the soul that has identity.
Thank you, Veronica. This next one has to do with an associate of mine, actually, who was very interested in our work and problem, however. He perceived there was a competition between being spiritual and being physical. And in his specific case, he said, look, I like the spirituality thing, and it seems really interesting, and metaphysics, but I don't want to give up my physicality. And his main concern was he didn't want to have to give up good food and good sex. It was physical. Now, my response was that everything is better with spiritual awareness, and I'm talking about golf, gardening, food, sex, whatever it is, it's always better, and I'm pretty sure this is true. It's always better if you have spiritual awareness, and the more spiritually aware you are, the greater you will appreciate each physical experience. So they're not in conflict. They're not in competition. And let's see if Veronica agrees.
When one is incarnate, one gets deeply involved in the physicality of the experience. There is no competition between your spiritual self and your physical self. The spiritual self recognizes clearly that you are in the physical reality, which means all of the rules and, quote, regulations that are within that, you abide by. When you're physical, the need to procreate or become intimate with someone is a very positive, important thing. But if you add a little dash of spirituality to it, it suddenly takes it to a whole nother level. And if you have that experience with the spiritual component, more than likely you're going to stay with that person for a very long time because the spiritual aspect of it can't really be duplicated in any fashion. We'd say that also it comes with good food, good experience, good participation in a physical, athletic kind of way. That's why energy incarnates. We have talked to many who say, why are we here? What are we doing? It's because you're here to have that physical experience. Now, of course, there's the mass consciousness stuff that gets in the way that sort of muddles everything up. On a physical level, you're here to have that experience. Adding the spiritual component to it makes it way beyond much better.
Thank you, Veronica. We also get a lot of questions about sexuality in the afterlife or in other non-physical dimensions. I'm not just talking about the causal plane. I'm talking about, after you die, for instance, or even maybe in a dream state in one of the astral planes or some of the other slightly less high-frequency planes. Is there something that's like sexual intimacy? Is there a blending, or is it black and white, is kind of cold and boring, or can you actually have this really incredibly fulfilling, energetic experience if you're not physical?
Absolutely. Blending energetically is perhaps way beyond anything that could be physical. And it is probable and it happens. So let's say you have a very intimate partner, friend, and the partner crosses over. And then maybe a few years later, you cross after them and you reunite. Now, of course, at that point, neither of you have the physical bodies that you were wearing the last time you encountered each other. But moving your energy into that individual energy is probably a sublime experience that one wouldn't want to miss. So connecting is not just a physical thing. And if it's just a physical thing, sometimes it can be rewarding in the moment, but not fulfilling eternally. Blending after the bodies are all gone and you're just the energy is something that can go on for eternity. And many do partake of that and find it to be a very rewarding experience.
Okay, thank you, Veronica. And this is something that you said that I wrote down, and I wrote down, you are not alone. And the basics of it were that it is necessary for you to understand that those in spirit are always available. And I know we've talked about this before. Everybody has spirit guides and they're not alone, but we get so many questions about people who feel alone. Could you, re-emphasize or talk about the fact that they're not alone? They always have people around them, and they will be around them, individuals, forever.
When you are in the physical reality, it can become extremely difficult because of the denseness and because sometimes you might be a unique energy and not easily assimilated in all of the linear dramatics that go on. So there can be a feeling of isolation, a feeling of separateness that emphasizes the idea that you're in this physical reality all by yourself. And the reason we have brought forth the concept of you are never alone, because it is important to understand that guides, energies that have known you, are all available and all around you constantly. You might shut them off. You might say, oh, I don't believe that. But it doesn't change the fact that they're there. So we'd say it might be a good idea to at least consider the fact that there's a bevy of energy around you that knows you from maybe from other places and knows you from perhaps your soul group that really would like to connect with you and endeavor to move through some physical things with you if you would allow it. If you decide you're alone, then yes, you're alone. But if you decide to consider the concept of guides and sometimes even angelics that are with you, then you could have a totally different experience.
Okay, so this next thing that I've written down is so directly connected to what Veronica just said that I'm just going to read it and not ask for further comment. It says, this is a great line, the topic was no separation. And the line that I like the most is, there is no separation, only in reunion. Those in spirit know. So anyway, occasionally you get my notes. Let's see, what else do I have here? This is, I wrote down, the title of this was The Soul is the Source. And it talks about, and this maybe everybody's not going to like this, especially people who feel like they're victims, or they see other people who appear like they're victims, like, people in war-torn areas or whatever. But, the facts are the facts. And it says, whatever moment you find yourself in has been created by you. Therefore, the conditions around you have not created the situation. You have created the conditions that place you where you are. Blaming the conditions will only serve to heighten their existence. And I believe this, I assume this goes for pre-birth decisions and also choices that you make while you're physically incarnated. Okay, so here's the question, I guess, and that is, thought creates reality. You create your conditions, and even though it seems like a lot of people are victims, that in the bigger picture, right, everybody lives forever, there's no death, that it's good to know that you create your reality.
Well, physical reality tends to muddle up the best of thought processes. There's a lot of mass consciousness stuff that comes into play. So it is important for you as an individual to stay as clear thinking as you possibly can. Even if there feels like there's been a truckload of garbage dumped in your path, you have to rise above it and move over it, if you possibly can. You are a magnificent being. You have the ability to create what you want. Sometimes there is a dump truck that does dump the garbage. You walk around it. You move up and over it and leave it all behind. And we realize that's a tall order. We realize that's a difficult thing for most. But we would beseech all of you to at least consider the fact that even if stuff is dumped in your path, that you are capable of moving past it and are capable of creating what it is you want.
Okay, we now come to the part of the program where Veronica will give her message to the world. I am going to suspend my humorous interlude, which was about 45 minutes, to get right to Veronica's message. Hold on.
Every day in physical reality, the sun comes up. Every day it travels across the sky. Every day the sun sets. There is a span of time within all of that is available for creation. There is a span of time there for you to adjust your thoughts. There is a span of time there that can be different than what the previous day brought to you. You should view every sunrise as an opportunity to change whatever it is that bothers you, or whatever it is that plagues you, or whatever it is that makes you sad. Perhaps it would be a good idea to get up really early one morning. Stand outside, sit outside with your favorite beverage, and watch the sun come up. It's a magnificent viewing. As the sun comes up over the side of the horizon, there's like this huge energy swell that happens. It's like a new dawn, a new day. And attach yourself to that energy. Decide that it's going to be indeed a new day. And sweep out all the stuff and allow the sun to come in. Now we know that there'll be a lot who say, "Oh, Veronica, really, please." And we would look right back at all of those who would say that and say, "Yes, please. Watch the sun come up. Look at all the value and the opportunity that indicates as you watch it come up over the horizon." Yeah, look at it and decide you're going to use that energy rather than poo-poo it and say, "Oh, well, that's not going to work." Because a lot of times all of you will say, "Oh, well, that's not going to work," before you even heard the whole thing, or even before you've done the exercise. So we'd say, do the exercise, hear the whole thing, and see what happens.
Thank you, Veronica. And that concludes the interesting part of this broadcast. I will just mention that if you'd like to know more about Veronica and April Crawford, you can go to Amazon.com and just search April Crawford, or you can go to April's website, which is aprilcrawford.com. Talk to you next time. Thanks.